You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
We've got two nurses on the line from Pennsylvania. We've got Joe Gentile. He's a critical care nurse. He's been a critical care nurse for over 40 years, and he's worked at St. Mary's for more than 30. Bill Engle is an RN. He's been an RN for more than 24 years, and he was a Navy veteran in the hospital corpsman. Folks, we're really happy to have you on the line today. Thank you so much for joining us. And so if you could, we read that you won your election on August 24th of last year. We're really happy about that, obviously. So if you could kind of talk to us about when the people in your hospital started talking about unions, and if you could tell us what were some of the main reasons that started people talking about it and being interested in it.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so hello, Alabama, and good morning from Pennsylvania, the great Northeast here. So, yeah, we had a wonderful hospital. It went from a small community hospital to a great major medical center in our area. And what happened was, about 4 years ago, we were taken over by Trinity Healthcare. It was at that time that the degradation and dissolving of all the good things that we built up over these many years started to happen. And people started to notice, specifically nurses, that not only staff, nurses and physicians, were leaving, they were being put upon, supplies were disappearing, supplies were being less than what we had had. See, we had built up such a good reputation, and now that all started to insidiously dissolve. And it really culminated with two of our really good ICU, CCU nurses being fired over process and not really over character or what phenomenal nurses they were. And this really upset us. We were already on edge because we saw our shared governance model, the magnet model, our shared governance model being dissolved into more of an autocratic thing. And we said, wait a minute, as nurses, as experienced nurses, as more mature nurses, something's amiss here, something's wrong. And that's what started our trek to say, we are losing our voice. We did sit with the administration for a year and a half, our CEO, our CMO, our CFO, and our CNOs, several of them because they were fired frequently, and our directors, and said, hey, let us help. We're on the front line. We're nurses. We know what the solutions are. We know what the problems are. Let us help you. We don't need a union. We don't need anybody else to come into our home and help us. Let us tell you, Trinity, how we've done this for many, many years and how we can forge ahead, together for the future. And for about a year and a half, they listened to us. They took that information, they stabbed us in the back, and they tried to get a ton of us disciplined and or fired because they didn't want to hear nurses having a voice. So we tried to not do it with the union. Thank God for the union. A couple of our ICU nurses reached out to the union and said, we need help. And when I heard that, I coupled with them and said, okay, let's hear what they have to say. And I had the first 3 or 4 meetings in my backyard on the patio with them. And then we had several meetings in my own home in the next 3 or 4 months, gathering more and more people, finding out what the union was all about. As a conservative Christian constitutionalist, white gentleman, old grandpop, I did not want a union. But right. I'm telling you, God bless TASNAP. They gave us a voice, and they collated all the things that we were trying to do and gave us a forum of where we could take back the hospital of ours that was being disintegrated in front of our eyes that we built, and we labored so hard to get such a great reputation as nurses.
Right. And that's something that is very common, that folks outside of the labor movement, they don't really recognize as much. They think that unions are just it's just about getting people raises, or it's just about winning these narrow benefits on the job. But it's really, for a lot of people that are in unions, that is a secondary or even a tertiary concern. The biggest concern that a lot of people have is, I want to have a voice on my job. I've been doing this, like I said when I introduced you, you've been doing this for 40 years. You know how to do your job, and you've got this big, multi-billion-dollar corporation coming in. None of these people have ever stepped foot in an emergency room floor or anything like that, and they're trying to tell you how to do your job, and you know how to do your job, and that you tried to tell them, they wouldn't listen, and the only way you could make them listen is through having a union.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, the biggest thing with us nurses was as they were doing all the cutbacks, it starts to put the patient's safety in jeopardy. And as nurses, our first calling in the medical field is, do no harm. And we always call them the suits because, they sit in their offices and they count numbers and all those things. But to us, it's much more. I mean, it's a way of life. And, I joined after the fact. I mean, Joe and others were involved in the genesis of the movement at the hospital. And I joined about 3 or 4 months into it, realizing all the cuts and how it was making our jobs harder. But not only that, it was putting the patient safety. That was the biggest thing with us, was the patient safety. These are people that in our community that we know, that we walk with, that we see at the stores, that we see in the parks, people that we know, our loved ones go there, we go there. And, that was what brought us with the union. And they showed us the ability to, give us a voice, give us the power back to give the care that we really, really want to give.
Right. Can you talk a little, you mentioned patient safety. Can you talk specifically about some of the things that the new administration in the hospital were doing that were undermining patient safety and subsequently y'all are fighting against with the union and as nurses? What are some of the things that they did that undermined patient safety, and how are y'all fighting back against that?
Well, I mean, one thing was every day, they had a choice to make once a new administration came in. They could leave it alone, take away, or add to it. And they were cutting back the ancillary people, like who put the supplies on the floor. So if we needed something in a quick moment, we would go to the supply room and it wouldn't be there. Cutting back on ancillary staff, making us have to do many more things instead of just concentrating on patient care. Cutting back, adding to the number of patients that each nurse has, which doesn't allow you to keep a closer eye on some that we need to. Joe, do you want to?
Yeah, Bill, you hit on it right on. Yeah, you hit on it, Bill. It really was staffing and supply. They started cutting staffing and supplies, and then saying, "Well, we're not going to rehire once we lost nurses. We're not, and those who we are going to rehire, our wages were 15 years behind every other hospital in our area's wages, and so we couldn't attract or retain good nurses. They'd come out of school, they'd come to St. Mary's, they'd stay for 2 years, and they'd leave. So the staffing, Bill said it very easily, it was safety and staffing. Staffing was being slashed and cut. Bonuses or accreditations and stuff that nurses were getting, they were being cut and slashed too. So if you had a certification like your CCRN, we were getting some money for that before. Now they're cutting and slashing that, taking away education day. So what it was a real decimation of the nursing department and cutting away directors and managers and combining units. So we were having less representation from our managers, and we were having the staffing issues were dramatic. Not in my area where I was at, but in the house-wide area. And I think this is what was so important about it. The union gave us the ability to get out of our own silos and see what was happening in the rest of the hospital and how devastating our emergency department was being with staffing or our critical care area. And so it was really interesting to see, oh my gosh, we thought it was bad in my unit. It's 100 times worse in another unit. So that understanding is what really galvanized us to say, it's unsafe because of staffing and supplies. We got to change it.
Right. So, Bill, you mentioned that you were a convert, so to speak. That you were not on board from the beginning of the union movement at this hospital, And so obviously, you know, there was a reason that you weren't on board at the beginning. So could you you were kind of in the anti-union campaign, so to speak, at the beginning of it. So can you speak to some of the concerns that you had as somebody who was not for the union, and what have you seen since then as far as any of those concerns come to fruition, or were any of them valid, or and if not, what was it that showed you that your concerns were not really warranted?
Concerns in what regard?
I'm sorry?
Concerns in what regard?
In what
regards to what?
Just generally speaking, like why were you against the union at the beginning of the campaign,
okay.
and what brought you over?
I wasn't necessarily against the union in the beginning. See, now we tried to unionize about 3 years prior when Trinity first came on board, and I was always kind of like Joe. You know, we didn't need a union. I just thought it was part of the process of going from being a local hospital to becoming part of a broader nationwide system that Trinity is. But then, you know, I figured, okay, we'll give it 2 or 3 years. And like I said earlier, you know, as time went along, they just kept cutting. Like Joe said, you know, they cut directors, they cut staff, they didn't rehire nurses, and they just kept taking. And we live in a very affluent area, and we have a lot of private insurers. So we make a lot of money at our hospital. We're one of the lucky hospitals because of where we're located. And it was just, I just couldn't take it anymore because, you know, I work up on the floors. I work on a med-surg telemetry floor. And, you know, on the weekends and on nights, you know, we were just so short-staffed. It was just putting things it was just making things dangerous. So, you know, as I saw this happen over, you know, 2 or 3 years, and the union came back around again, I was like, I got to be on board now because, you know, I gave them a chance to show their worth, so to speak, and it didn't happen.
Right. All right. We're coming up on a break. We're going to be talking to the nurses after the break about their election, what happened in the lead up to it, and winning it subsequently. So stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. Thanks for listening, folks. If you want to keep up with us throughout the week, you can follow us online. We've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. You can search us on YouTube at The Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist, RADICL Unionist. If you appreciate our work and want to ensure that we can stay on the air, consider supporting us with a monthly donation on Patreon at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.